Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES television.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there were two major news stories for which there was no significant change this week: the weather and the selection of a New Orleans police chief. Temperatures have been rising for both. Going in a different direction are residential property values. Like the weather, there is no immediate relief in sight. Elsewhere, a controversial tech contract was canceled by the Orleans Parish 911 agency, which recently has seen plenty of controversy. And there are constitutional concerns about the condition for youths being held at Angola. We'll look at these stories as well as the latest in politics and a victory for those annoyed by bike lanes as two are shut down in Algiers. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Stephanie Riegel, staff writer for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Bobby Jean Missick, staff writer for Verite News, and Ben Myers, staff writer for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. We go over to Stephanie first. You had a piece this week about news that really is not too good regarding property values going down for various reasons here in the New Orleans metro.
Right, and we've been talking all year about the rising insurance rates for homeowners and flood insurance and the rising interest rates. And all year, experts and agents and people in the business have been saying, this is going to have an impact, this is going to have an impact. We're starting to see the market cool. And so we looked at the market numbers for the first 6 months of the year, January through June, and compared it to the same period last year. And you could really see the chickens have come home to roost now. And those factors have definitely had a very chilling effect on the market. The median sale price market-wide across the 9 parish New Orleans area is down about 3.6%. Now, that's not huge when you consider how much it was up from the COVID boom years, but it's still, it had been going up less slowly. When we looked at the year-end numbers 7 months ago, we saw that it was going up less slowly. Now they're actually down. And more troubling, perhaps, is that the volume of activity is just stalled out. Sales are not happening, and homes are sitting on the market for a whole lot longer than they had been, almost 50% longer than they had been. I talked to one real estate agent who's been doing this for like 35 years, and she said this is the deadest it's ever been. And because, if you looked at a graph, say, of home sale prices over the past 20 years, it would look like the stock market. It's been going up. Individual years or months, it jags up or down, so you'll see drops a little bit here and there. But it's just the fact that the activity is so slow and that the factors behind it seem to have no solution in sight, and that's namely these insurance rates.
Right. That's the real what really
problem.
Is the slowdown of this activity, is that people just can't face these insurance rates?
Because even if they find a house that they're able to afford, even if the interest rates are something they can deal with, once they get these insurance quotes, the deal is just out the window. And I talked to some mortgage brokers who said, they have stacks of deals sitting on their desks that just couldn't close because the buyers couldn't afford the insurance at the end of the day. So sellers have made a lot of concessions in recent months just to try to help get deals done. Maybe they're paying for the closing costs. Mortgage brokers have come up with some programs to help make it more affordable for first-time home buyers or middle-income home buyers. These interest rate programs where you'll get a deal for the first year or two, and then when it kicks back up to 6 or 7%, which is what the market is right now, hopefully in a couple of years you'll be able to refinance.
Is it primarily the insurance that's holding people back from signing on that dotted line?
That's anecdotally what the experience is. And not just that not just that they can't afford it, but there are some places that aren't writing insurance,
right.
you know? So it's a crisis all over the market. Now, as we were talking before the show, there are pockets where you saw the median sale price go up. So there are some areas of the city that remain strong. The heart of Uptown, the 70118, where you have some of the wealthiest real estate in New Orleans, we saw a slight uptick there. 70005 in Old Metairie, we saw a slight uptick there. And then a couple of neighborhoods, the French Quarter, parts of the CBD, and parts of Treme and Faubourg-Marigny also were up. I think some of the Treme Faubourg-Marigny may have to do with investments in short-term rentals, you know, or in short-term rental properties that have changed hands, and that's really impacted that. The river parishes in near Laplace also saw a big increase, but that was an anomaly, I think, because of Hurricane Ida, which had really depressed prices throughout much of 2022, since that area was so hard hit by that hurricane. Now, renovated properties are on the market and they're artificially inflated.
What about St. Tammany?
St. Tammany looked pretty good. St. Tammany was the only parish that was basically like steady, slight increase. And some of the agents I talked to there said, you know, St. Tammany is always in demand, good value, good school system, perceived safety, and this goes back to the insurance thing. Above I-12, it's easier to get the homeowners and the flood insurance. And so that's why I think some of those areas have done well.
Is anybody mentioning crime as being a major problem, or is it a given that it's always there?
I don't have any anecdotal data on it. I talked to a couple of agents. You know, there are a couple of people who are always going to bash Orleans, and they chalked up some of the slowdown in activity to perceptions of crime and danger and just fed up with the city. You know, I didn't put those quotes in the story because I just didn't have a sense for how widespread that is. That's a sentiment that some people definitely feel. I don't know how legitimate it is in terms, because you see other people that are embracing parts of the city, you know, and I think it just plays into stereotypes. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I heard that from a couple of people. I didn't hear it widespread at all. And I think the fact that like 70118 is so strong, that Treme and Faubourg-Marigny and the French Quarter saw increases while everything else was down, I think that maybe sort of negates that perception.
And so one area went up to 466 per square foot, which outpaces the Garden District and the area around Audubon Park.
Right.
So that would probably be, you think, the Marigny?
It was right around the edge of the
short-term rental impact,
I think
maybe?
the impact of that. But
Yeah.
I'm crossing that data with some other data that I got that looks at it by zip code. So hopefully I'll have more in-depth answers on that soon.
But right now, definitely an impact by insurance. Right?
Not a good time to be trying to sell or to buy. So buyers and sellers are both just sitting on the sidelines, hoping that something gives. And a couple of people I talked to said, if we get through hurricane season relatively unscathed this year, they think the insurance companies will ease up and start writing more policies. But they didn't just mean if New Orleans is spared. They meant the whole Gulf Coast. And that's the real kicker there.
Sure is. It's a big
Because
if.
even,
It's
you
an
know,
if we'd like to see,
if
but
Florida gets hard hit, we're all going to have to feel the
to pay
impact
the
of
price
that.
too. Okay, Steph, thanks a lot. Ben, over to you. Orleans Parish still in the search for a police superintendent.
Yep, the mayor said this week that so there's 3 finalists, the confirmed finalists, but the mayor is holding off on interviewing them until she gets sort of a final word on a 4th potential finalist, but I say potential because he's withdrawn, but she wants to see if he'll come back and join the fray. So next, I guess we're waiting to hear from is whether the mayor is able to get a hold of him and whether he's interested.
Okay, so there were 3 different groups that came up with their recommendations. This so-called external group, then the city official group, and the police group, agency group. Did they all come up with the same 3?
So
4?
it's been a little bit hard to know who's recommending what. We know that there were 2 panels, one composed of internal city officials, one composed of one council member, Oliver Thomas, and then some other kind of civic business leaders. And they each had a chance to interview 6 semifinalists and came up with recommendations. The IACP then did some scoring of all of these 6 individuals and came up with a ranking just in terms of their scores. So there were three slates kind of put forward based on that. The two of the six dropped out, and then there were sort of three finalists that the Cantrell administration selected then based on those recommendations.
Go ahead, E.
Acting Chief Woodfork was perceived as being the mayor's candidate. Does it not bode well for her that the mayor says, hey, it's somebody I want to talk to still?
Yeah, I think it was true up until recently. At least the perception was that Michelle Woodfork was the mayor's kind of choice or preferred candidate. But I don't know that that's true. I don't know that it's not true. She seems to be certainly telling everybody that she's going to take her time. And it's hard to tell if there really is a favorite right now. And in fact, there's been a little bit of public pushback a little bit on Michelle Woodfork. Jeff Thomas recently wrote an editorial saying that she's probably not the right candidate. He was praising her abilities, but saying she's not transformational, in his opinion. Then there was the external panel actually included a handwritten note in their recommendations saying that she didn't have enough experience. So I don't know what to read into that other than that there are some signals in the public sphere suggesting that maybe she's not right. And I don't know if they have the mayor's ear or not.
What does it mean to not be transformational?
That's an excellent question. What does it mean to be transformational? And I should say that Michelle Woodfork addressed that today in WBOK in an interview with Gerard Stevens. She said, that's not true at all. I've been very transformational. She's made leadership changes as soon as she's been there, and she's been attempting to change the culture.
And so the mayor also has said she doesn't need to make a selection from any of these. I mean, she can choose who she wants. But of course, whoever she chooses has to get confirmed by the council.
That's right. She allowed the possibility that maybe she'll just go off on outside of the IACP process. And it's absolutely true that whoever gets selected will have to go through this council process.
Okay, so it goes on.
This will be the first time ever that we experience this, a council having to approve a mayor's appointment.
Yeah, and we'll see where it goes.
We will see. It'll be interesting no matter what.
All right, Ben, thanks a lot. Okay, Bobby Jean, let's go on over to you. And there's raising concerns about minors being held at Angola, minor offenders who have been adjudicated through the system. But for various reasons, the state is now sending some of these minors over to Angola. Why don't you tell us about that?
Right, so the governor and the Office of Juvenile Justice announced that they would be sending these kids to Angola last summer, and pretty quickly a lawsuit was filed to block that, but a federal judge let that happen, and so they started sending them in October, and since then attorneys for the families of the young people that are in Angola have said they've found out that, you know, the services that the state's supposed to be providing for the kids, things like individual educational programs for kids with learning disabilities and mental health counseling, things like that are not being provided. And there have been reports from the youth there that there's been sort of, they've been placed in solitary confinements. One whole cell block was placed in solitary confinement, so giving this idea that they're engaging in group punishment for these kids, and they were, they were saying they weren't allowed out of their cells for more than 8 minutes a day.
So why are these kids being sent there in the first place?
Well, so last year there were a bunch of escapes, some violent, from the Bridge City Youth Center in Jefferson Parish. And in fact, they're calling this section of Angola, which is a former death row facility, they're calling it Bridge City Youth Center East Feliciana, which is where the prison is. Mm-hmm. So that, including overcrowding in some of the facilities. And so this was supposed to be a temporary move so that a facility in Monroe could be expanded. And they were supposed to have the kids out by April of this year. But it looks like OJJ is saying that's going to happen by October.
But not all youthful offenders are being sent over there.
No, not all. They have said, when the announcement was made, it was said that these would be sort of some of the quote-unquote worst offenders.
Violent offenses, that type of thing?
Right. but they're youth, so there's only so much that we can know about.
And about youth, what ages are there?
Well, as young as 15, so 15 to 17 are being held in these facilities.
In the facility. So a suit was filed, but now the Department of Justice also has intervened.
Sure. So there was that initial preliminary injunction last year, which was declined. Then the lawyers for that suit, they filed another motion for preliminary injunction to get the kids out. And the Department of Justice has now added a statement of interest, basically saying if the allegations that are being made, that they're not getting the services that they need, that they are being subjected to solitary confinement, if those things are true, then these kids are at risk of serious and long-term harm.
How does the state respond to this?
Well, the Office of Juvenile Justice has said, that they're not going to comment on something that's ongoing, but they have said that the kids are getting, are in facilities with AC, which that was one of the claims that was being made, and that they are getting the services that the state is required to provide them.
So they do have air conditioning in the units that they're being kept in?
According to OJJ.
Okay. And what's the status of it now? Nobody's been moved from there yet, right?
No, I mean, there has been some back and forth. So some of those kids have been in there and then come out and been transferred to other facilities and then gone back in. But there's not like an emptying of that facility. What's going to happen next is that second motion for preliminary injunction, there's a hearing for that on August 15th, so pretty soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bobby
Thank
Jean. E, over to you. Politics. What's the latest?
This time next week, we're going to all be a lot smarter. Right?
Oh, okay.
Qualifying is this coming week, August the 8th to August the 10th. Whenever qualifying comes up, there's always speculation, about some really big names that get in and change the whole thing. That hardly ever happens. I mean, any really serious big name would have been out there already and would have been smart enough to have been campaigning and would have also been raising money. You don't start raising money on the day of qualifying. And so you may get some more candidates, but it will be the kind of person that has a business that's looking for publicity or something, like a boudin stand or something like that, But so I think the people who are in the race are pretty much the ones who have gone down to it. A year ago, when you looked at this race, you said, it's going to be a big race because the incumbent John Bell Edwards isn't running for re-election.
For governor, yeah.
Yeah, you had the governor. And so anytime you don't have an incumbent, you really have a big battle. That may not be the case this year. Landry has just gotten so far ahead in the campaign as far as the fundraising, as far as the advertising, and it's really busy. He also has a novel type of campaigning that's kind of new, and which is websites. And there's a lot of things on television, like YouTube videos and things, that he sponsors that, and his wife is the voice and all that. And so he's clearly the front runner in this. The other race of local interest, though, I think it's going to be in Jefferson Parish. The governor's election year is the same year that Jefferson Parish and a lot of counties around the state have their municipal elections. As is Jefferson Parish, there's not much that's contested. The big race for parish president is not contested, but the two at-large races are contested. In both cases, you have an incumbent being challenged by a district member who's term limited. And those are going to be big, expensive races. I think that those might be the best shows in town. The other thing people are wondering about is the impact that Jeff Landry's campaign is going to have, or how it's going to be affected by Donald Trump. Landry has Trump's endorsement. Trump, as we've seen this week, is in all kind of trouble. And people wonder, what's going to happen to him politically. The feeling seems to be that Trump is not in trouble with those that really believe in him, and there's a lot of people that really believe in him. He is in trouble, though, with the people that have kind of wavering a little bit, who may have voted for him in the past and say, I don't know if I want this anymore. And so he may be losing some of that undecided voter. Only thing is, they don't know where to go either. So a lot of questions still have to be answered now.
Okay, but bottom line right now, the most immediate future is qualifying, which is an important time next
Qualifying,
week.
yeah. And so this time next week, we'll know all that.
What the slate.
We'll know where to go. Probably the real intense part of the campaign won't start till after Labor Day.
Right.
And then as you get into those last couple of weeks in September, it's going to really take off.
Okay. All right, Eve. Thanks a lot. All righty, Ben, let's go on back over to you because a really big contract the city had entered into through the Department of Communications has just been canceled.
It's the Orleans Parish Communication District. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is a separate entity than city
Right.
government. But
Right.
to start briefly at the beginning, in 2019, City Hall conceived an RFP, drafted an RFP, and spent, I think, $80,000 getting it drafted for a technology overhaul, basically a records management system for both NOPD and the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office, which is also not part of City Hall. But that RFP was never released for whatever reason. The city, I think, says it was because of funding. And for whatever reason, Orleans Parish Communication District decided to take over that entire project. Why, I'm not exactly sure, but it became a project of the Orleans Parish Communication District, and they selected a vendor without going through any kind of competitive solicitation. This vendor did not have the experience that was laid out in that RFP that had been drafted, and had very little experience, frankly, at all, but was chosen for whatever reason. This vendor then was brought in, and almost from the start, the City Hall and NOPD employees working on this were complaining about how it didn't work very well, it wasn't going to meet the needs, and they were having problems with the personnel from that vendor. The vendor's called Hexagon. And this went on for years until finally, just this week, they announced that it would be canceled. Yeah.
And of course, the guy who handled this and signed the district onto this contract is no longer with the district.
That would be Tyrell Morris, the executive director, who stepped down recently amid a different controversy. This was clearly his project. I mean, he was leading this whole project. He spearheaded it. He's the one that chose this vendor, convinced NOPD officials to take it. It's also worth noting that the sheriff's office never agreed to take it, but the contract that Tyrell Morris signed was for both NOPD and OPSO. So it was a $6 million contract over 5 years to supply both of those agencies with this product. So there was waste to begin with because OPSO never used it.
And this was supposed to streamline and make easier access to information coming from Sheriff's Office, from NOPD.
So within NOPD, there's roughly 20 different legacy, what they call them legacies, records management systems. This is for evidence tracking, case management, things like that. And this product would have streamlined all of that into one central system. It also would have talked with the Sheriff's Office and their jail management system. $2 million has already been spent on this, according to the Chief Administrative Officer, but we don't actually know the real figure.
And it's never really worked, and now it's non-existent. The contract
now
it's
just non-existent. They're starting apparently from scratch. I don't know exactly what the next steps are, but that's 3 years and $2 million gone.
And can any of that money be clawed back?
Don't know. The Chief Administrative Officer, Gilbert Montano, says they're going to try, but he didn't sound very hopeful that it'd be possible.
All righty. Thanks a lot. Bobby Jean, back on over to you. And in Algiers, some people who just did not like some bike lanes that had been established. They said that they had just not been talked to about it, not enough input. Bike lanes are now gone.
Yeah, they're being removed right now. So the city said that it'll take about 52 days, and they got started about 2 weeks ago, or week and a half. Yeah, but some people really didn't want them, and those people, their voices
That was even
were heard.
an issue in the last council race, wasn't it?
I think that was a large issue in the last council race, and the current council member, Freddie King III, really ran on getting these bike lanes removed. And one of them on Newton is in front of his law. It runs in front of his law office. Mm-hmm. So, he would have had an interest if he was opposed to it. He had a personal interest in having those bike lanes removed.
No, but there are those, and you cited some in your piece who did like them, who used the bike lanes.
Sure. And one of the things, I didn't include in my piece, but I spoke to the former city council member for Algiers, Kristen Gislason Palmer, and she was saying the voices that that you don't get heard, or sometimes the ones that sort of miss out. And I spoke to, just a couple people on Newton that were biking. And when I got to that neighborhood, there were a fair amount of people using that bike lane, and they had no idea about the vote to remove the lanes last September, and they, they didn't realize that the lanes were going to be coming up so soon.
But many of the residents over there in that area really felt like they were not consulted at all about the bike lanes coming into being in the first place,
Sure.
and they were not happy about that.
Sure. So yeah, there were people who felt that there wasn't enough community engagement, and that they, that maybe there were meetings announced, but they didn't know about them. One of the big things that was pointed out to me was that this was happening as the pandemic was raging. So there came a point where those community engagement meetings were happening online, and that might have changed things for folks. And there also, there is this argument that advocates make that, or bike advocates make that I should say that, what happens, it's human nature to see a flyer or something about a meeting, and if it doesn't pertain to you directly, you're like, okay, I'm not going. So yeah, there's arguments about how much engagement there was or not.
Okay, so these lanes, two different bike lanes in Algiers, now being dismantled, taken
They
away.
are. They're going to go back to their old configuration.
All right, thanks a lot. Okay, time for other stories, everybody. E?
There was a time, if you're talking about Jefferson Parish politics, as we just did, that you describe it not in terms of conservatives versus liberals or Democrats versus Republicans. You describe it in terms of the Donlan people versus the Shahardy people. Donlan was the parish president. Shahardy was the
Assessor.
Was the assessor, and they were just big factions and big rivals. A subset of that faction was John Mamalinas, who became district attorney, served a long time. He died this week, but he was certainly a part of it. What comes to mind, though, with the 1972 campaign, when he ran for his first full term against Jim Donlan, who was a nephew of Tom Donlan, one of the all-time big political battles in Jefferson history. So.
Okay, so John Mamalides, age 90, I
Right.
believe, was he? Okay, thanks a lot. Wow. Steph, over to you.
We talked last week about the Audubon Riverfront plans. They were due today. Ron Foreman and his people brought them over to Mayor Cantrell. So she will continue to look at them. I think it has a lot of city support, but now it's officially in, so the process begins.
Laborde?
I'm really looking forward to this hearing about the kids in Angola, just to find out what is going to happen in that situation. And on the other front, just more stories about immigration detention, particularly at Gina.
Okay, all righty, thanks. Ben, over to you.
Six Flags should be coming back up in the news maybe sometime soon. There's a board meeting on the 14th in which we'll see if they are on the agenda or not.
All right, we'll find out. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES Television.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.